Hello, people of New World. It's Milamani, and welcome back to the channel. And today, I'm finally going to be talking about the healer meta update for both PvP and PvE. We'll be going through all the builds, perks, everything you need to know so that you can effectively heal in Season 1 and everything moving forward. So let's dive into all this stuff. I'll be honest, not a ton has changed, but there's definitely some differences that you have to be aware of. All right, so here we are on NWDB. We're going to be starting off with PvE, and then there's so much more to talk about with PvP. Pretty much the standard for PvE healing is you're going to run all AoE healing over time, and if you're really looking to speed push, then you're going to use your Void Gauntlet with Void Blade. So right now, if we do an AoE healing setup, we have to take Absolved, and then we'd go into Blissful Touch, we'd take Sacred Ground, we'd take Desperate Speed, we'd take Revitalize. Now here's where we have an important thing to mention. Sacred Protection, this does give you 5% increased healing to your group, but it does make you take a ton more aggro for some godforsaken reason, so just completely avoid it like the plague, because otherwise things will chase you constantly. We then also have to go into Orb of Protection, we'll take that all the way. We go Bend Light, Protector's Touch, Protector's Strength, this into Beacon, and then we have one more point. It's up to you what you'd like to do. If you'd like to go into Sacred Protection, go for it. Totally your choice. You could go Enchanted Justice, your choice, but this one also sucks because it's 2-minute cooldown. You could also go into Mending Touch and then take that debuff removal for PvE related things. I don't know, whatever comes up, or you could even take this haste. Those are pretty much your options for PvE healing with your life staff on. Now, if we dive into the Void Gauntlet, you are strictly looking to use Blade, Scream, and Oblivion. Now, your last two perks are going to be a little bit weird or passive, sorry, and let's dive into it. We'll be Void Blading all the way. We're going to take Oblivion all the way. We'll take Scream all the way. The only thing with Blade is that we don't want to take Leeching Blade because we will never heavy attack, and this is just a useless point. Instead, we're going to go into Forsaken Pact here because this is just some free damage. If you get low mana, you can always use a mana pot or something. Take the crit chance because it's important to have that for refreshing precision. We want as much cooldown reduction crit as we possibly can. We'll go into here, we'll take here, we'll go here, here, and here. That leaves us with 2 more points. These are all the important ones. Now, on the decay side, it gets a little tough. Fervent Thirst, pretty much a waste of time, so we're going to have to take this just in case you ever do hit a basic attack with somebody who has an active debuff, and then it's up to you. Personally, I would take Radiant Efficiency because Refreshing Harvest no longer exists, and Cleansing Harvest, it can be valuable, but with the way you have to play as a healer in PvE, you are just constantly hammering through cooldowns and trying to deal as much damage as possible with your Blade out, where Cleansing Harvest is just not going to give you enough. So that's my opinion, but when you're PvE speed pushing, you will want to use Blade. All right, so on to PvE gearing. For our life staff, I'm highly going to recommend not taking Refreshing Move, and here's why. You're just not going to get enough out of it. If you have enough Refreshing stacked, you'll never need that little boost from Refreshing Move so that you can get your cooldowns up so that you can pop a Sacred Ground down. With that being said, I would prioritize getting Soul Flare out of Dynasty Shipyard on level 9 or higher mutated versions. It has Refreshing, Keen Beacon, and Blessed. This is going to be a solid move because Keen Beacon will amplify the damage of everybody being healed by Beacon, including yourself, because you get so much crit and because you have it on weapon. That is just gigantic. So it's another stack of Refreshing. We don't need Refreshing Move because it's just constant downtime that it won't really ever be active. And so I would prioritize that. On our Void Gauntlet, we're going to need Bane and then 2 other damaging perks. Totally up to you, but the important thing is getting a corresponding Bane so that you can pump. I will say too, the nice thing is with Season 1, if you have Void Blade, Enchanted does actually apply to your Void Blade swings now. So keep that in mind when you're trying to find a VG while you're healing. Now, here's all you really need. Technically, you could run a full 2-perk setup, but on all of your gear, you're going to need Ward and Refreshing. Now, if you aren't a healer who's not running Blade, you don't technically need Ward, I'll be real. But if you're running Blade, you need Ward because you're in melee and you're going to get dunked on. Anyway, Refreshing is crucial on these pieces because you need to have enough cooldown reduction that you can constantly have Sacred Grounds, Beacons, and Orbs available for your team when you quickly swap back. So that is an absolute must. But when you're looking for best in slot pieces, you need Ward, Refreshing, and anything else that'll just work for the build. There are some gear pieces out there from random mutators such as Laz where you'll get Ward, Ellie Aversion, and then a random 3rd perk on a 600 piece. It is the priority to have Refreshing. Sacred Ground is king, and we need it to cycle so that as soon as Sacred goes down, we have another one available for the team. On our Amulet, we'll be wanting health and then whatever elemental protection is corresponding with that mutator affix. So for instance, we could use flame protection, ice protection, whatever it is, whatever kind of damage they're doing. On a ring, it's sacred, refreshing, and then you can run hardy, but you technically don't need hardy in PvE. It can be valuable just to have an extra dodge there though. And then under earring, I would take refreshing toast, healthy toast, refreshing. In terms of ability perks that you're going to need, quite honestly, you don't actually need any. I think the one that's really nice to have is Keen Beacon to maximize crit chance. But if you want additional healing output, which again, you don't need because you will heal plenty, you can fit Mending Protection somewhere on a gear piece. And then two, having the Fortify from Fortifying Sacred Ground can be another option. Fortify is much weaker now after season 1. So having Fortifying Sacred Ground, if you can't fit it, you can't. But if you can get it as a third perk, that's great. And again, the healing output from Mending Protection is not necessary, but it's definitely a third perk option as well. I think Keen Beacon is definitely the priority in PvE. The gems you're going to need to use for this build are whatever the elemental mutator affix is. So again, if it's fire, you'll need a bunch of rubies. If it's ice, you'll need a bunch of aquamarines. On your life staff and in your void gauntlet, you'll want diamonds so that you can maximize damage output or healing. Your Heartrune you'll be using, personally, I think running Brutal Cannon is a huge move for AoE output, but if you're trying to group up enemies, having Grasping Vines is going to be another really solid play. I would highly recommend for group synergy running Brutal Heartrune of Grasping Vines instead of anything else, but Cannon if you're just looking to rock a ton of damage. When you are PvE healing and you're doing a mixed setup with Void Blade, you're going to be wanting to play around 50 to 100 con. I would highly suggest playing 100 con, and if you're not comfortable, going up as high as 150. But the priority here is to have 150 int. Then just throw the rest into focus. We want that 150 int for more elemental damage and a skill with our VG. And then we have mixed int and focus scaling that really help us pump out that additional damage. Now, your rotation for PvE healing, it's pretty simple. Once your tank is in place, do not precast this, but make sure they're in a spot where they're going to be holding mobs. Put down Sacred Ground, throw Beacon into one of them or on an enemy, and then toss Orb on your group. Once you have all of your healing over time effects running, you're going to swap to your Void Gauntlet, and then turn on your Blade, drop Oblivion for the group, scream if you need to, and just keep swinging away. This is going to be your best way to just deal a ton of damage. You'll have great cooldown reduction where you can keep dropping Oblivions. This is going to help charge your Heartrune incredibly fast where you can get tons of cannons or tons of vines out. And it's going to be a fun play style. You do have to play a little bit safer. And again, because you're in melee, that's why you're prioritizing having ward, but just keep on pumping. You'll just rinse and repeat. As Sacred goes down, you'll drop the new one, drop Beacon, swap back to your Void Gauntlet, etc. It's just over and over and over again. Prioritize using your Heartrune when you have multiple trash clumps packed together. So as soon as you have a big pull, just drop it on top of them, whether it's cannon or vines. All right, now for the thing that more people really care about, let's talk about PvP healing. Now, as a PvP healer, there's 3 distinct roles that'll pop up in wars, okay? You either have a group healer, you have an AoE healer, or you have a dive healer or schizo healer kind of build. Well, let's just start off with the group healer because this is what you'll typically see. These are going to be the people who are healing the main ball clumps. You're going to be responsible for 4 players who are playing around point, and you need to prioritize keeping them alive. So the builds you'll be using are first, we're going to go Divine Embrace, Sacred, and then we'll play Beacon. Now I'm going to talk about why not Orb right away off the start. Here is the standard group healer build that I would suggest. I'm going to go here, go all the way into Sacred, go here. I'm actually going to take this point, and I don't have to take this point anymore because we don't need Absolved, and it's kind of a waste. So it's like a pseudo healer buff in season 1. Here, here, here. We can take Intensify because we have that extra point now. And then we'll go here, 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 and here. This is my group healer build that I would do. This is also what I run if I'm going to solo queue into OPR. But with this build, it gives you a good mix of AoE output as well as having single target throughput that can then bounce to other players. And you will be surprised at how many times you'll actually get this double pounce. And the thing that's nice to mention is because we don't have to take Absolved, you can take this and this point as extra points, right? You don't have to sacrifice one or the other because there's just zero reason to ever take this because having heavy attacks no longer consume mana is just a negligible gain. In all, this is going to be really solid for anybody that's going to be healing players around point. Now, the pivot you can make is you could actually go out of these and you could also drop here, and you could go into Orb. Now, the thing I'm going to mention is a lot of players used to do this pre-season 1, but after the Fortify change with Orb of Protection, giving a pretty significant Fortify, this Fortify is actually going to make any light armor players take more damage from abilities as long as somebody's running Invigorated Punishment. So for you as a healer who's always in light armor, this isn't the same for medium and heavy players, but for you as a healer who's in light armor, because of this one right here, whenever you hit people with Orb, you will also get Orb, meaning you're just innately going to take more damage from abilities because you'll constantly have that Fortify running. Now, I'm not saying that this is a bad build to go. I think there's definitely still a lot of wiggle room, but I think for anybody that knows that their group is mainly composed of medium to heavy players, that this is definitely still a move to have. So Orb of Protection can be a viable group healing build, but I would say these are your primary group healing builds. Now, as a group healer, I would also make one other caveat that you can play, something that I play, it's my main build, and what I'd use is a dive build. So you could go like this, take all these same points. This is going to be your standard left side, but you can go into Light's Embrace and go there, and we take this point because it'll make Light's Embrace hit harder. This is a group build that you can use for players on point. You're not going to have as much AoE output, but I tend to use this as a dive healer. It's by far my favorite healing build in the game. Anyway, let's dive into AoE healing next. We'll get back to this build in a second. So if we reset this, what is our standard AoE output build? I'd go here because we have to take Absolve now because we're not going to be taking Divine Embrace. The AoE healer is looking to maximize healing output and then get as much healing into groups as humanly possible. We'll go Bend Light, Protector Strength, max out this, max out here. Now, one thing I like to mention about Beacon is that I never take Speed of Light because I feel like if I have the haste on Speed of Light, yeah, it's great. It's got minimal value, to be quite honest with you, but typically I stack Beacons on top of Sacreds to maximize healing output. If anybody in that clump who's getting healed by both of those then gets a haste buff, sometimes I think psychologically, people just think, hey, I'm running faster, I should probably move forward. And then they're more likely to move out of a Sacred Ground or any sort of AoE healing that might be down on the ground. As such, I feel like it's just counterintuitive. And so I tend not to take that point so I can opt for things like getting Intensify or getting, another passive over here. But this is what I would run if I am an AoE healer. Now, it's obviously great if we could get Divine Blessing because that'd just be more healing output. But the thing is, we would lose some solid value over on this side. So for instance, if we're looking to maximize AoE healing output, we would have to drop the beacon last 5 seconds longer. Now this isn't huge because you'll have so much RE that you can just get beacon back on pretty much immediately. But if I were going to be getting the just complete maximum Divine Blessing AoE healing output build, I would drop Radiance's Blessing, I'd drop Protector's Touch, and then I would go into Enchanted Justice and then take Divine Blessing. So this is the pumper I'm going to pad, but I think pretty much the standard for wars and such is to go to the latter. All right, let's dive into dive healing now. So dive healing, this is pretty much the role I play. I heal either a dex group or a kill squad. Now, this is going to be a little bit different because we don't want to prioritize abilities such as Orb or Beacon because we're not AoE healing main ball. Okay, we're not really worried about Fortify because our group is going to be made up of 4 other light armor players, and we are just simply looking to counteract burst damage. So when I'm looking at a build like this, this is the standard that I was talking about before. We go here, 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 and then we go here. We take these. I mainly just take Intensify when we're pushing into forts and things like that, or if I can hit a structure so that it can juice up my Sacred Ground a little bit more. You don't really need it for Divine Embrace, and you don't really need it for Light's Embrace on the other side. This is going to be the standard dive healer build. So I like having double single target heal options, and then as well having a Sacred Ground that I can perhaps drop on a bow. I can drop on myself. I can drop it on the clump to help kind of push through a gate or to help cap a point. It's just a nice thing to have. Now, if you're not a person that likes prioritizing 2 single target heals, you do have another option. I think no matter what you do, you never drop Divine Embrace because this is such a strong heal with a constant reset if you have the perk on your weapon, and it's just something we can't really give up. But instead, another alternative is that you drop Light's Embrace, you keep these points, and then you actually go into Splash of Light. This is another really solid option that you can use for groups if your bows perhaps don't really play together, or you get a line of sighted a lot in Fort. This is just something that'll give you a lot of spread healing. You don't have as much burst potential, And the one thing to note with Splash of Light is that you can get caught pretty easy. It's just something, if you clap right now and you stand still, I don't like it because of this reason, but if I'm standing there, I am just going to get bodied by a Dex or a Fire Staff. And then at that point, I'm throwing my life and I'm throwing my team's life away. So it's really up to your preference. If you can use this in a safe spot, you just have to make sure that you aren't casting it directly in front of somebody. So Splash of Light is definitely a bit of a nuanced ability. Now, on that note as well, you do have another full targeted healing option. If you don't want to run Sacred Ground, you can drop Sacred Ground and keep this build. But then what you can do instead is actually go into Light's Embrace. And this is a decent option in forts. So this is something I've played once in a while if I feel like I'm healing perhaps a kill squad, or maybe my Dex is running around above on ramparts and I really just struggle with line of sight issues or even range issues. Splash of Light is great. It's a 100-meter range. You don't need line of sight, but then I still have all of the burst healing options. Again, I'm a person that prioritizes Sacred Ground because I think it just lets you ego other players. You can stand in it, eat it. You can use it for a lot of different things and keeping yourself alive or keeping multiple group members alive as long as you're coordinated. But I think with Splash of Light, it's just a great option for fort play. So as a dive healer or a Dex healer, any kind of group like that, I think there's a lot of viability in having this if you're either defending fort and everybody's spread, or if you're pushing an attack on fort and you struggle when people are spread out as well. So those will be all of our healing options. You've got a lot of different builds for your roles. It just depends on preferences at that point and what your company needs. But the other thing we need is our Rapier. I'll be real, people ask me this all the time, what other secondary can I use? You do not have a better option than Rapier. You have evasiveness, you have mobility, you have ways to just keep yourself alive that do not compare to any other secondary in the game and let you reposition on the fly. So what do we go here? We go Refreshing Strikes because this is free cooldown. We go On Guard, and then we don't need any other points here. We'll max out Evade. And the important thing to note, if you're a player who's coming back, this no longer just gives you 20 stam regardless. You do have to evade through an enemy attack to get that to work. And then we go Riposte and we go all the way in, and it's nice because we get cooldown reduction potential there. And then we go this passive, it's just damage, you don't really need it. Controlled Breathing is great, it gives stamina back, and if you run a Rune Glass on your Rapier, you can get this to apply multiple stam back per tick if you hit multiple people, and then you have a Rune Glass gem that's ticking up on enemies. This was, I believe it's a bug technically, but we'll see. Critical attacks, reduce cooldowns, so another good option. Swiftness here, extra haste, and then we take Flesh, and I only go 2 points in because we don't really need to do this. Again, both of these points are kind of whatever. I'm not really going to light attack, but when I want to just, slap out my big rod and kind of pump somebody a little bit with my Rapier, I'm going to go Momentum, and I'll just keep Evade, auto-attacking them and praying for the best. Basically, don't take Perfectionist, and then you can take this if you want to use it as kind of a juking tactic. It can be a little bit odd because if you're going to use that to juke, why even use Flesh in the first place? Because then you just wasted your mobility. But this is the standard healing Rapier setup if you're looking for PvP mobility and survival. For gearing, we're going to want the Life Staff out of Dynasty that's going to have Refreshing Divine Embrace, Refreshing Move, and Blessed on it. So Glowing Crystal is just your best option for PvP. It gives you that quick reset on DE, so really prioritize hitting DEs on people who are below 50% health, and then Refreshing Move and Blessed are just a nice option. On your Rapier, you're going to want Refreshing Flesh, Keen Speed, Keen. Refreshing Flesh is super nice if you can get those quick resets, and so this is just more viable than running something like Sundering Riposte, because most of the time people just dodge Riposte anyway. Now Armor is where we get some flexibility. Your perks that you're looking to prioritize are Resil, Refreshing, Freedom, and Elemental Aversion. So when it comes to Resil, you do not have to play 5 Resil if you want to try and fit in Freedoms or Refreshing or Ele Aversion somewhere else. I play 4 Resil, but Freedom is one where it's interesting. You can either play 3 Freedom or 5 Freedom. And I will say, if you haven't played 5 Freedom, give it a test because you'll notice a difference from 3 Freedom. But what I would also recommend is never play 4. There's a big difference between 0 Freedom to 3 Freedom or 0 Freedom to 5 Freedom. But between 3 Freedom and 5 Freedom and hitting 4 Freedom, there is not enough of a difference where you're actually going to be getting out of things fast enough to make it a viable option to play 4. So essentially, if you're going to play 3, stay at 3. If you're going to play 5, stay at 5. Personal preference is what matters. Refreshing, we need at least 5 Refreshing in our build somewhere. So in general baseline, you should end up in a Abyss build having Refreshing on your ring, on your earring. Okay, so now you need to fit Refreshing into 3 spots on your gear, whether that's helmet, chest, legs, boots, gloves, wherever you want to have it, you need at least 5. You can play more if you'd like, but we need 5 for the instant reset if we have Refreshing Divine Embrace on our staff. Now, Elemental Aversion, this is one that helps a lot with fire staffs. Personally, in my BIS build right now, because I play LE, DE, and all that stuff, here's what I'm running. I have 4 Resil, I have 5 Freedom, I have 1 Elemental Aversion, and I have Accelerating Light's Embrace on my chest piece. On our amulet, you should be looking for health, stamina recovery, and thrust protection as a healer. Bows will still decimate you. Bows are the main priority. I think it's a little bit of a throw if you run flame protection. There's so many other sources of thrust, including blunderbusses, rapiers, spears, some stabbing abilities, muskets, and then bows. Whereas if you run flame protection, you are solely dedicated to fire staffs when you can just run a fire absorption potion and you'll be good to go. Ring, Hardy Sacred Refreshing. And then on our earring, Refreshing Toast, Healthy Toast, Refreshing, or if you're not somebody who likes Healthy Toast after it doesn't get the Sacred buff on it anymore when you're in a Sacred Ground, you can run Focused so that you get mana regeneration, and then instead you could run a little bit different of a potion setup, or you could even run Purifying Toast instead of Healthy Toast. So those are your options. Personally, I like having the additional buff of just having like a 1500 heal from a mana pot. It's really nice to have on the fly, especially when you're in a bit of a dive comp. And I think that's just better for me. But again, that's where preferences come in. Let's talk about AoE healing really quick. Just talking about our gearing. Everything is pretty much the same. The only thing that's going to change is your weapon. You'll have Blessed, Refreshing Move, and then Mending Protection on your life staff. And that's pretty much the only other difference. The thing you have to consider then is you want Refreshing Evasion on all of your armor and jewelry instead of Refreshing. Otherwise, your perk splits and everything like that. Just swap Refreshing to Refreshing Evasion. Everything else will be pretty similar. You want as much Refreshing Evasion as possible, running it on almost every armor piece if you can. The only thing that shouldn't have Refreshing Evasion is your amulet. Now, let's talk about actual armor perks on your gear. So, if you are in a general setup for group healing or dive healing, I do not run Fortifying Sacred Ground anymore because, again, we still have to think about it. If it goes onto a light armor player, they're actually going to take more damage. The only time that Fortifying Sacred Ground is worth is if you have a point group that has heavy armor players in it, in my opinion. Yes, medium players will benefit, but you have to sort of outweigh, is Fortifying Sacred Ground or is having an additional defensive perk like Freedom, Elemental Aversion, whatever, or what have you, better for me personally? Because the gains that even a medium armor player gets from just having a 10% Fortify boost are negligible. And so quite honestly, I don't think it is worth ever running on your gear unless you are healing a heavy point group. Now, if you are using an orb build for group healing, you will have to fit Mending Protection in there somewhere. When it comes to gems, we want a diamond in our life staff. We want a rune glass amber in our rapier. And then in our gear, I run a 20-10-10 split. So 20 thrust, 10 slash, 10 LE, and then I'm at like 5 strike or whatever, however you set that up. Personally, I just play around fire and magic damage using like fire absorption potions if I needed them or gemstone dust. But right now, it's just thrust damage is still king when you're playing a healer. You'll get picked by decks if you aren't rocking it. The Heartrune you'll want to use is Stalwart Stone Form. Why are we using this over Cunning? Stalwart gives you a 75% Heartrune damage per second heal while it's active. The reason we use this is because the Fortify that you get from the Cunning just doesn't really give you that much of a benefit anymore because of the Fortify nerfs, especially while you're in light armor. So why not take a couple extra ticks of healing that'll most likely keep you alive as opposed to a very, very, very weak Fortify. All right, let's talk attributes now. If you are a group healer in general or a dive healer, I'm going to highly recommend playing in a 300, 200 build, and then any extra points would go into con. So when I'm playing in my BIS build, I am 210 con, 300 focus. You have enough healing output, and then just gives you a little bit more survivability. Now, if you're an AoE healer, this is where you have some flexibility. Personally, if I were AoE healing, I would play around 100 or less con, depending on your preferences and how long you can stay alive. Upwards of 150. I think 100 is the sweet spot where you still get a ton of healing out and can still survive. But if you're slippery enough and you feel confident, you can play as low as 50 and just really pump your clumps. Now, when it comes to rotation for PvP, it's different because there's so many things that are happening. It depends on your build and how you're going to be playing. Now, I'll just give you some common tips while you're in a PvP environment. I think one is always use Refreshing Divine Embrace on people who are below 50% health. It is okay to stall and wait and not immediately top somebody off. If you need to top them, use Light's Embrace and make sure you say 3, 2, 1 topping and make sure they really know that it's coming. That's what I do. You keep those comms running. But only use it when somebody is for sure below 50% health if you can. If you have to precast and it just happens that you don't hit it, and it's okay. Or if you know you're going to have enough time for it to come back, then don't worry about it. On that note, always be precasting. This is something I do a lot. If you unbind your block from your settings, you can still cancel your casts with right click, and we'll talk about this in a separate thing, but you should be casting with Light's Embrace or Divine Embrace and just be ready for somebody to take damage if they're in a fight. I just keep going, I have it going, and then when it's almost about to cast, I right click. Or if I have to, I dodge. Don't over dodge so that you don't spam yourself, but I just cast, and then when it gets close, I right click and cancel it. And if they're taking damage, you want to be ready, so if you see them take damage, you commit the heal so that you can top them off in time. Now, on that same topic, unbind your block. A lot of times, people will still use block to actually interrupt their cast. Well, this is a good way to mess with your stamina. Let's say you just rolled and you start a cast and you're at like 50 stamina, just started regenning, but then you block to cancel your cast. Your stamina regeneration stops. There is no point in you blocking as a healer almost ever, unless you're just a god. You're going to have way more benefit by continuing your stamina regeneration and getting rid of that block keybind. Next thing, always be clicking. This is something, if you watch a stream, I'm just constantly clicking at clumps, trying to shoot through players so that they get blissful touch healing. But also, if I happen to do damage to somebody and kill them, great. If I hit anybody, I get refreshing move ticks and revitalizing ticks. That's fantastic. And so that's just another really big thing to have going. And when you're always clicking, make sure that if you're not able to hit a player, if there's structures that you are able to hit, this is free cooldown reduction. So when you just pivot from like going from points into fort, if you can start hitting gates, horns, or oil vats, anything that's there, if you're hitting those and you're an AoE healer, you will be getting some free cooldown reduction there, just pumping through. It is a lot of healing to get beacons and sacred grounds down on clumps so that they don't have to worry and you are just pumping through the heals. Another thing is use targeted keybinds. As a healer, I use foot pedals. If you're unaware, you can check the video on the channel. It's from months ago, but I use foot pedals so that I can use those as my keybinds. Otherwise, set up something that you're comfortable. But if you bind a key to every player in your group other than party number 1, because that's you can then just hit your ability and then hit whatever key it is that person is, and it'll just instantly heal to them. You don't have to bother with the clunkiness of scroll wheel healing, and then people end up dying. This is the only other thing that I think is crucial to learn and really creates a skill gap between players. My last tip is don't panic. I think a lot of the time people will use their rapiers and instantly riposte if somebody's up in their face, or they'll blow all their stamina if they're getting pushed. Be patient. If you blow all your stamina, you are guaranteed going to die because you're exhausted and can't roll. They'll CC you, you're toast. If you just burn your riposte and then they wait for it, 9 times out of 10, you just stalled long enough that they could get more teammates over there and make sure that you're dead and you couldn't buy time. Make sure if you're going to use your rapier that you're going to be using it to reposition it to a safe location and you're not just diving into people, getting extra damage, and just dying. There's so many things as a healer that we have in our kit to keep ourselves alive, but the last thing you want to do is sit there and stam yourself or sit there and blow your defensive cooldowns and then be caught out and have nothing. Because if you are playing a crucial role like a healer, it's just going to result in more teammates dying, especially if you're in any kind of group where you are the sole source of healing, like a dive group or a dex group. And if they can't get healed because they're not playing in the clump, they're going to die. That's pretty much all I have. I know there's a lot in here. We talk about perks, we talk about builds, we talk about pretty much everything. And I'm hoping that this gives you some info on how you can best heal for Season 1 and heal in general. Now, if you disagree with me, go suck an egg because I really don't care. You can comment down below and we can talk about it. But if you need anything, if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Discord, send me a DM. We can talk about it a little bit. But if you need a better source or a reference point for some of this content, head on over to Icy Veins. I'm going to link the guides down below. These are all updated for Season 1. It's written content. It's in a text format. You can easily reference it and be like, oh, hey, I should be using this perk here, or I should be using these perks in this gem. It'll give you everything you need to know for your builds. But As always, I hope this helped. Sorry I sat here and rambled, but I appreciate every single one of you. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you to every single one of you beautiful people for being you. Peace.